The story begins in London, UK, with a former detective, Jacob Cannon, a New York police detective, just arriving in London from New York. He is there to identify his daughter Kimberly and her husband Thomas, who were brutally killed during their honeymoon. Shockingly, their bodies are horrifically mutilated. Thomas with a severed arm in his mouth, Kimberly with both arms missing, below her elbows, and her eyes forced open. Jacob is even more shocked when told that a postcard was sent to a journalist 7 days before the murder. Then, the scene shifts to a newlywed couple, Mac and Sylvia, riding a train across Europe. They're approached by a stranger with tattoos who introduces himself as Peter. He tries to get to know them, but the couple appears to be uneasy. After some time, Peter goes to buy a drink for the three of them. But when he returns, the couple is already gone, leaving a hat behind. Back in London, Jacob's angst becomes so intolerable that he begins to drown himself in alcohol. Then one day, his divorced wife Valerie bursts into his apartment and throws the alcohol bottles into trash can to stop his downward spiral. Later, Jacob and Valerie discover that before the murder of Kimberly and Thomas, another newlywed couple was also murdered in the same manner. But that incident took place in Madrid, with their lips severed. Similarly, a journalist in that city had also received a postcard before the crime. Later on, Jacob goes to London Police Department and asks he himself wants to investigate these killings. However, they deny him the permission, urging him to return to New York. But Jacob is determined to find the perpetrator, telling them he won't rest until the murderer is caught. Soon after, another murder takes place in Munich, with a gruesome scene. A woman's lifeless body is found, with her finger inserted into a man's stomach and the man's ears severed, while a pair of eyes hanging from the ceiling. Jacob immediately travels to Munich and meets with the detective, Klaus Bublitz, hoping to get some details about recent killings. However, Klaus informs that he can't share much information with him. However, he shows Jacob some crime scene photos, which Jacob captures on his phone. Then the two seek guidance from an art professor, who suggests that these murders seem connected to some famous artworks. Meanwhile, a journalist, Desi, from Stockholm, receives another postcard about an upcoming murder, and the news spreads across whole Europe. Upon learning this, Jacob heads to Stockholm to further investigate the case. He tracks down Desi and follows her around. Jacob tries to ask her about the postcard she received, but Desi gets scared and closes the door. Jacob leaves his contact information on her door and leaves. Elsewhere, while drinking in a Stockholm bar, Peter notices Sylvia and Mac walking outside. He goes out and invites them for a drink. While hesitant initially, they feel awkward rejecting him again and accept the offer. While drinking, Peter asks why they abandoned him on the train. They claim they left a note for him. The next day, while investigating about the murders on internet, Desi discovers about Kimberly's murder. Realizing that Jacob is her father, she immediately approaches her boss, requesting she work on an article about Jacob, claiming it will be profitable. Later, Desi calls Jacob and meet him, apologizing for not speaking to him yesterday, as she had no idea he was the victim's father. Desi then shares with him the postcard she received. They talk about existence of 3 dots at the end of a sentence. Jacob says that it was an earlier postcards as well, implying that it's a sequel, and the next murder will take place soon. Meanwhile, Peter takes Sylvia and Mac to a pub and introduces them to his wife Nyenker, a tattoo artist. When asked why she wasn't on the train with Peter, Nyenker explains that she prefers to travel by plane. Nyenker then invites Sylvia and Mac to join her and Peter on a private island. Next day, while on the ferry, Peter returns Sylvia's hat which she left on the train. However, Sylvia gives it back to Peter to keep as a gift. In the meanwhile, Jacob returns to Munich to meet Detective Klaus, the only person who seems to understand and help him, with the Swedish police blocking him out of the investigation. Together they examine security footage from the Munich Museum, where the artwork was exhibited, to find some clues. They notice a couple there, but can't see their faces as they're wearing hoodies. Jacob again goes to Stockholm and shares the information with the police. They investigate footage of all the museums in the city as well as hotels and airlines. They want to trace a couple who has recently traveled to London, Munich, or Madrid. And soon they mark Peter and Nyenker's profiles as suspects. The two arrived separately, one by train and the other by plane, which is indeed highly suspicious. They also discover that Peter and Yinker attended an art school. Thus, the dots are linking, and it makes sense that they're serial killers who replicate famous works of art with the victims' bodies. Police also searches Peter's apartment, but they find it empty. Following some leads, the police proceed to the island where the couple went, and they are shocked to find Peter and his wife Yinker dead. Jacob discovers Sylvia's head among the dead bodies and breaks down in tears as he realizes it belonged to his daughter. Afterwards, Swedish police examine security footage from boats to the island and capture the faces of Mac and Sylvia. And as Mac and Sylvia prepare to leave their hotel, they find themselves cornered by police. The police arrest them and interrogate them separately, but they narrate the same story. Both explain that they did accompany Peter and Yinker to the island, but left early. Sylvia shows them notebooks full of receipts proving she was in other places at the time of the crimes. Jacob doesn't believe the two because they have an answer and alibi for everything, which seems to be well rehearsed. However, police say they can't jail them without evidence, and that only thing they can do is mark their passports, preventing them from leaving Stockholm. In the evening, stressed, Jacob calls Valerie in New York to update her on the investigation. He wonders that Sylvia and Mac appear to be ghosts because there's no record of them, and they have no past. The next day, Valerie does some investigation and finds out that Mac's real name is Simon Haysmith, who is the son of Simon Haysmith Sr., who is currently behind bars for embezzling $300 million from his Wall Street clients. His scheme was so expertly executed that no evidence could be found against him. The breakthrough came when his son Simon exposed his father, claiming that he hated his father and wanted to see him destroyed. However, since Simon was only 15 at the time and a minor, this information was kept confidential to protect him. Meanwhile, Desi meets Jacob at a cafe and tells him that another couple has been discovered dead in Amsterdam, having been murdered between London and Munich incidents. Just then, a person at a nearby table gets up and leaves a receipt behind. This reminds Jacob that Sylvia must be collecting other people's receipts to use as an alibi to get away. Meanwhile, Sylvia is in a hotel where she recalls visiting a museum as a child with her father and her younger brother. Their father teaches them about art but also yells at them not to show any weakness. Later that evening at Desi's house, Jacob requests to use her computer for browsing. Allowing him, she steps away to use the bathroom. While on computer, Jacob notices a file in his name on the desktop and realizes that Desi is working on an article about him. He assumes that she might be exploiting him for her personal gain, thus he quickly leaves without a word. That night, Jacob heads to the hotel where Mac and Sylvia are staying. The patrol officer guarding the hotel notices him and immediately alerts the police station. Swedish police call Jacob, informing him that he cannot break into other people's rooms. Meanwhile, Mac and Sylvia use the elevator to escape, while dressed as hotel employees. As Jacob arrives at their room, the police follow closely and discover two dead hotel staff inside. Mac and Sylvia retrieve their Russian passports from a train station locker and leave, while wearing wigs to cover their identity. Later, Desi finds Jacob drinking in a street and apologizes for not telling him about the article. She says she has no plans to publish it, but Jacob says he doesn't care anymore, because the people responsible for his daughter's murder have already escaped. Back in New York, Valerie takes a daring step by breaking into Haysmith's abandoned house. However, she's noticed by a curious neighbor who reveals that the house has been empty for years. The woman invites Valerie for tea, and Valerie also seizes the opportunity to find out more about the owner. The woman discloses that Mr. Haysmith always mistreated Simon and his older sister Marina. He had a lovely Russian wife, but one day she committed suicide. The kids found her dead. After this incident, the father started taking the kids to art museums and forcing them in abusive ways to be better at everything. And because of his torture and physical mistreatment, Child Protective Authorities eventually took both of his children. The next day in Belgium, police find another dead couple. But this time the victims are not newlyweds, but two grown-up men. Meanwhile, Desi shows Jacob the photo of the Amsterdam murders. He notices his grandmother's ring and is certain that the arm in the image belongs to his daughter. Horrified, Jacob breaks down in tears, while Desi comforts him to ease his pain. Back in New York, Valerie goes to meet Haysmith and quickly figures out what kind of a man he is and what type of parent he is. He keeps insulting his children. He claims that because Simon and Marina were so inseparable, he had to instill good morals and discipline them. Meanwhile, Desi and Jacob discuss Simon's desperate efforts to reunite with his sister many years ago, who had been placed in foster care. Then, he suddenly realizes that Simon's sister Marina is none other than Sylvia, and the two have been traveling Europe pretending to be a married couple. Next, the siblings are seen in a hotel room planning their next move. Simon worries about what might happen to them. He wishes they could put an end to it and can resume their normal lives. Marina promises she will be by his side, no matter what, and that their immoral actions will ensure that faith for them. It appears that Marina and Simon's crimes are in defiance against their strict father, who taught them all about art. They recreate famous works of art using the bodies of their victims to express their wrath and need to be understood. Meanwhile, Jacob and Desi finally figure out a way to stop their crimes by letting their message be heard. Desi publishes a report about her interactions with Jacob and the man she perceived him to be during the investigation. She also carefully describes the murderer's intended message, claiming that they must have experienced severe mistreatment as children and that their sole purpose is to be understood. Upon reading the article, the siblings feel happy and comforted for being understood. Marina then sends an email to Desi to thank her and also chooses her as their next victim. Afterwards, the duo sends postcards to several cities with a message, "We are reborn," with just one dot, signifying that this is their last murder. Thereafter, the siblings are seen continuously stalking for Jacob and Desi. They finally track the duo down on a snowy highway in Helsinki. By causing a deliberate accident, they take Desi away and Jacob gets unconscious. Later, on waking up, Jacob requests a ride from a truck driver. Meanwhile, Desi awakens in Marina's arms, who tells her that she likes her. Desi pleads with him to let her go, but the siblings pull over by the roadside. Simon offers Desi a medication that will numb her pain entirely, but Desi continues to resist. Just then, Jacob arrives at the scene and aims his gun at the murderers. Marina taunts him, referring to what his daughter confided to them about her parents' divorce. But Jacob doesn't listen to her. Just then, Marina spots a knife nearby, but before she could act, Jacob shoots Simon in the stomach. Marina screams in panic and drags Simon into the snow, yelling they're meant to live together forever. But Simon succumbs to his injury. Afterwards, we see Jacob in the hospital, where Klaus visits him. Jacob says that he allowed Marina to escape, knowing she would not survive in freezing snow for long. Klaus informs him that Simon and Marina had no blood relation, because they were both adoptive children. Hearing this, Jacob gets sad, since the couple could have gotten married and lived happily, without murdering all those innocent people, including his daughter. In the end, an unknown caller is speaking to Haysmith in prison, and it turns out that the caller is none but Marina. And the movie ends. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button to help us out. Until next time, take care.